say seems very straightforward, and as you're speaking, I think, oh yeah, that's right. And I'm, I can almost feel like thoughts coming in and trying to keep coupled to the
right,
the self or the I or whatever, or me.
right.
And yet what you're saying is, I can see that it's there can't be anything else.
Exactly.
So unteasing that
right.
glue or whatever, the feeling of glue.
Right, and it does seem that we want to stay with those thoughts. Like for some reason, thoughts present themselves in a way that we just, initially we have this belief that they're telling us the truth. But if it's considered to any degree, I mean, it's quite obvious they're not telling us the truth. And so, in what I'm presenting, I'm just presenting what we know in each moment of our day. If we actually had to just acknowledge what's going on in our experience, we would find out that, our storyline is actually utterly ridiculous, even if it does seem to be of some kind of practical use on a day-to-day basis. But there is this focus on that storyline, and it seems like initially when you start to see the ridiculous quality of it, the fact that it can't really be the truth, there's still an orientation to that thought, and still the feeling that we need to think about life in order to straighten everything out. And it's an odd situation because basically what there is just a happening, like one big happening that's happening on its own. Like everything's moving and shifting in the same way that the seasons are changing and the planet's revolving and all the rest of it. So, and it is like the flowing of one great event. And then we have this impression that thought is going to somehow help us understand this event, but what happens is thought is somehow acting in a way that it divides the event up. It relates to the world of form, which literally doesn't actually exist in any actuality, like any truth. And then it begins to label these forms. There's that feeling of separation, and then inevitably there's the idea that I'm somehow maneuvering existence. And so we're always, within that storyline, we're always at odds with what's actually happening. So when somebody comes along and says, well, actually, how about this? As somebody was pointing out, another presenter was saying, all you have to do is rest. And I mean, I'm ultimately saying that too, like simply in that acknowledgement of the moment, simply rest. If you make no effort to do anything at all, the entire process of life still presents itself. The clarities that we have, the confusions that we have, the joys that we have, the sorrows that we have, everything just continues to present itself. But it's not like even if it seems to be true, like you're left feeling like this can't be the truth, like this can't be the fact, that it's all just happening on its own. And so it's like we hear these ideas and we want to kind of try to test them out a bit, so maybe we rest on a certain afternoon in a very safe place, and that seems to work out fine. But somehow we can't have the feeling that in the midst of an argument, all of it is just simply flowing the way it's flowing. And so if we're really drawn to this, if we're really expressed in this way, eventually there will be, we kind of trust it a little more, a little more, a little more, and then finally it really is the fact. Maybe there will be an acknowledgement that, yeah, I never was doing it in the first place. It's all just happening in whatever way it happens. So like when I'm invited to present this, like I don't really have anything to present. I mean, when I'm at home in Winnipeg, if I'm sitting around my own apartment, like I'll sometimes think like, what is it I say when I go to these people? like what is the problem exactly? Because on my own, I don't see any problem. It's just a totally mysterious happening, and it presents whatever it presents. And like, I'm not concerned with whether or not it presents a particularly happy situation, because I know I don't have any option. It will just present whatever it presents. And fortunately, it always seems to be a mixture. So I get plenty of happy moments, and I get plenty of moments of agony, and it's quite all right. And through most of my life, I've had a recurring energy revs up in my body, and at a certain point, like I never know when exactly it's going to be building, but it builds every so often, and then I end up having 3 nights of no sleep. I'm just tossing and turning. There's just absolutely no way to get comfortable with this energy, but it's just some kind of biological rhythm that occurs, and it's, you know, I used to try to understand it, but like after a while it just didn't seem to make any sense to try to understand it. And the same with all of the other difficult situations in life, like to try to understand what loneliness was, or to try to understand anger to the point that I never got angry. And it never really worked, because I could understand it really well. Like I could understand nobody was actually intentionally setting out to harm me in any way or aggravate me in any way, because I see that they're a legitimate expression of the universe. But it was the case, they still aggravated the hell out of me. And at first, you know, like you come to spiritual teachings, and everybody's looking for control, basically. That's what most human beings are looking for. They're looking for control, and this is the natural, you know, if we want to stay within the storylines about form and the definition of form and the interpretation of form, like, it's the natural development of all human beings. We apparently, within the storyline, come out of the womb. We all see babies coming out of the womb, or we've seen, you know, photographs of babies coming out of the womb, and like, we all know the baby doesn't have any particular storyline. So if we really consider what's happening for the baby, there's just a totally mysterious event. And basically, if I brought a baby in here, in the midst of this group, for everybody sitting here, you'd be thinking, oh, there's a baby in a room, but consider what it is for the baby. Like, there's no storyline, there's no interpretation, there's just this. And the baby isn't even necessarily focusing on any particular form, but the event is still presenting itself. So for the baby, it's just a totally mysterious event that's happening. And the baby isn't deciding, I'm going to bob my head this way or move my arms this way or that. And if you make a sound, an abrupt sound, the baby turns its head to look for something, because it still hasn't even, like, it doesn't even have the sense that this is sound as opposed to something called sight. It's all just one big mixed up, moving, shifting, dancing, vibrating event. And it was that for all of us. But then in the apparent natural process of our development, there is this focusing on form. And people are giving us words for these forms, you know, a glass of water. And I mean, it's endless. It's just like like mom saying, can you say nose? Can you say nose? And if you say nose, you're going to get a big round of applause. And if you say ear and me, and then eventually it's into consciousness and awareness and all these labels. Now, you know, just in my own process, how I'm presented, it just became an interesting thing to consider what we're getting there, because, you know, again, as we live life, over time, we will eventually come to realize that all these forms are changing. So if we start to consider what it is we're getting with this focus on form and the labels that we are trained to bark, basically we're getting a meaningless sound. It only takes on meaning when it points to an apparent form. And the forms aren't the legitimate fact of existence. All the forms are changing. So, you know, I have some people that, you know, maybe they're in their 50s and they want to object to the fact that everything is changing. So I tell them I'll speak to them in 60 years and we can deal with it then. And I mean, it's just absurd. Like, we all have the feeling that everything is changing. So again, when we look at just our very simple experience, our stories about existence can't be the fact. And but that's a natural development, apparently a natural development for all human beings. And then along the line, you know, in that we get the feeling that apparently we're a separate form from every other form, and we have the impression that there's something in here looking out, and we have the feeling that these forms, these various forms, are influencing each other. So there are people who come along and they challenge that assumption. People like David Hume, you know, he has his whole billiard ball thing where he says we don't actually experience cause and effect, we experience movement. So we see one ball moving and then we see another ball moving and we make up the story of cause and effect. What we see is movement and we make up the story of cause and effect. So these stories eventually get very complex and we're left with this feeling that we're somebody in a body, something invisible in a body, and that we're influencing all the other forms within life, whatever forms that we come in contact with. And the natural offshoot of that is we begin to feel that we have some kind of control and that our only way to find happiness is to focus on the pleasant things and to try to get those pleasant things and maintain those pleasant things. And so then we're left with endless frustration because the fundamental fact of life is that everything is changing, and our whole approach to life is the attempt to grab onto something and keep it from changing. So that becomes our agony. You know, we want to hang on to the pleasant sights, sounds, touches, tastes, smells, thoughts, the pleasant situations in our relationships, the pleasant moments in our health. We want to hang on to our youth. We want the world economy to stay a certain way. We want relationships between certain countries to stay a certain way. We want the weather to stay a certain way. So our whole approach to life is to attempt to control the moving, shifting, dancing event of life. And we're endlessly frustrated because we don't have that control. There's nothing in our life that shows that we could really have that control. And yet we pursue that. Along the way, somehow the storyline presents itself as somehow being more true than the actual event of existence. So if all of us went to some tropical island somewhere, none of us would actually want to sit in the hotel reading the brochures about what's outside the hotel. We would want to actually go outside and experience the event of that country, of that tropical island. And yet most of us want to sit in a room thinking about the event of life, thinking that somehow that description of life is more real than the event of life. You know, we have this happening right now. And most of us want to sit around thinking about the happening instead of acknowledging the happening. So within these traditions, they enter our usual storylines and they start presenting roadblocks to what it is that we're pursuing. So somebody like the Buddha would come along and say, have you noticed everything is changing? And that's a very simple thing to acknowledge. Have you noticed that everything is changing? That that's the basic fact of existence. And then he would ask, you know, if everything is changing, how do you think you're going to find your happiness by trying to hold it still? You know, your emotions are changing, your thoughts are changing, your moods are changing, your health is changing, your relationship is changing, everything's changing. And we're wanting to grab onto it somehow and hold it still. And he's saying, if your experience is that it's always changing, why are you looking to hold on to one specific expression of existence? Does that make any sense? So it's a very simple acknowledgement. And that's where the power is. Like, yeah, it might be great if we could all go off somewhere to a cave and meditate in some concentrated way and have a really blissed out experience, and that would be the truth. But the fact of the matter is that's also a passing event too, and even with the people that are really skilled at that sort of thing, it's just endlessly frustrating, because I know people who can put themselves in situations where that kind of experience arises, and they've been doing it for 30 years, and they still can't figure out why it won't stay. And most of them are Buddhists, where the main teaching is nothing stays. So, and they're consistently pursuing these special moments that are going to stay. So then, you know, at some point, maybe you run across somebody who's presenting this sense of existence and saying, you know, let's have a really good look at what our daily experience is, what our actual experience in life really is. You know, if we look back to our experience from our apparent childhood to now, if we examine the actual happening of this moment, what is it really presenting? What has it been presenting all along? What is it presenting now? Because that's the thing that has the power, the fact that it's been presenting the truth all along. So Right now, none of you are doing anything to be the process you are. That's a very simple fact. You don't need to be concentrated. You don't have to have like some kind of major insight to acknowledge that. Like, what are you doing right now to be the process that you are? Like, are you making your heart beat? Are you making the particular mood you have right now arise? Are you making the particular thought that you have right now arise? You know, the whole movement of your blood through the body, your autoimmune system working, all of that. What are you doing to actually be what you are right now? The answer is nothing. And it's happening anyway. You know, the particular needs that you have are expressing themselves. Maybe you're sitting here considering that you've got something major to attend to 2 days from now, and that's happening automatically. Maybe you're sitting here just hoping that this can't be the truth. And that's happening automatically. Maybe you're sitting here regretting something about the past. You know, maybe you had an argument with somebody at breakfast this morning, and that's happening automatically. All of it's moving and shifting and dancing all on its own. And this perspective is just pointing out that that's always been the case. In the same way that the sun apparently rises every morning, in the same way that the seasons move and shift in the way they do, you're simply presented. Like, we somehow have the impression that we think we're in charge of existence, and yet, again, if I ask any one of you, did you create your body? No, nobody really has the sense they created their body. Did you create your brain? No, nobody has the sense that they created their brain. Are you right now overseeing the individual firing of all of the synaptic connections within the brain cells? And no, we don't even have a sense that there are synaptic firings of the brain cells when we're sitting here. Are you making the breath come and go? Are you making the heart beat? No. Have you created your basic needs? You know, again, did you decide that you needed to eat every day? Did you decide that you needed to go to the toilet every day? Did you decide that, you know, in cold weather you would need warm clothes, and in hot weather you'd like to peel off all of your clothes? No, it just presents itself. That's just the way existence presents us. Our interests, you know, the particular interests you have, the particular loves you have, did you decide to have the particular interests or the particular loves? Your interest in non-duality. Did you decide somewhere along the line, at this point in my life, I would have an interest in non-duality, and I would be someplace listening to somebody presenting this perspective? No, life just presented us in this way. The particular concerns you have at any moment, like you might be dealing with very specific concerns, and somebody else has no concerns, no major concern at all, and you might have, you know, what seems to be some kind of traumatic life crisis going on. You didn't decide for that. You didn't decide that. You didn't ask for that. So all of these motivating factors in life that apparently move us through life, our needs, interests, and concerns, we didn't create those. And then the only response that we can have to those needs, interests, and concerns would be the only abilities that we're given. And we don't decide our abilities. We don't decide our lack of abilities. So just a simple consideration of what our life is presenting. You know, we may have an ability with music, and somebody else doesn't have an ability with music. I know people who have abilities with music, but they have actually no urge to refine that ability in music. I know other people who have no ability with music, and they somehow want to end up at Juilliard. It's like they have this incredible urge. I know certain people that are very athletic. They have great athletic skills, but they don't have any desire to compete in the Olympics. And I know other people who they have great athletic skill and they want to compete in the Olympics, and they're in the process of, you know, their whole life is focused on that, and they don't decide to do that. They're simply expressed that way. So again, it's just a simple consideration. Like, give me an example anywhere in your life of you directing your life. Please just present it to me. Like, if you have an actual example of that, present it to me and we'll just consider it. Yes?
Well, coming here, I was running late, and I was getting very tense, and I could feel one eye getting really kind of staring hard, And I was thinking, oh, I can do something. I can take in the whole picture instead of just being focused on this anxious person rushing to get to the event.
Yes.
So I did feel I had some choice, but on the other hand, I didn't really have much control over it because, and why did I decide to focus on the whole picture?
Exactly. You see, that's all this is. It's just looking at the big picture. It doesn't deny your specific day-to-day experience where it feels like you're making a decision. It just acknowledges that everything that you apparently are, everything that's apparently needed for that decision isn't ultimately your doing. It's the expression of something that we can't understand. So it doesn't deny your day-to-day life. It doesn't deny your particular storyline, your apparent storyline. It just embraces all of that with a bigger picture. Just a simpler acknowledgement that everything we are is simply a gift in a way. It's not really a gift because it's not that there's, you know, we're separate from something or we're getting a gift from something. It's more that we are the dance of the universe. So it's simply an acknowledgement of that larger dance. Now, all of the storylines, all of the apparent forms, they are all the legitimate expression of that greater mysterious happening. So the formless, that we can acknowledge, because we know that all these apparent forms are changing, the formless is apparent form. It's not that they're two separate things. It's not that the formless exists somewhere else. The formless is every apparent form. It's every apparent storyline. That's its natural expression. So in acknowledging that, and again, we can't even acknowledge that unless we're expressed in that way. It's not that we're somehow a superior human being that is seeing through the illusions of existence and coming to realize the truth in life, and it's too bad that all those poor, confused people in the rest of the world just can't see the truth. Like, that's not it. It's like, we're simply one apparent expression. It's one of the legitimate expressions of existence, but so is every other expression of existence. And it's not a matter of finding the one true understanding of existence, it's just acknowledging the expression that you are. And in that acknowledgement, you begin to appreciate the good things that life is presenting. It's presenting good things for all of us. It's also presenting terrible things. But if we're running around asking it to give us things that it can't possibly give us, we never actually sit back and realize the wonderful things that it's already giving us. And again, for those wonderful things, yes?
Yes, sorry, I don't want to stop your flow. But going back to the control and not control issue, I wondered if you could say a little bit more about insomnia, because I have had insomnia all my life. And whilst, as you correctly say, you know, one seems to be able to, it just happens or it doesn't happen, you know. There is nevertheless this feeling that if I could just allow myself to be asleep, it would happen, and yet it doesn't happen. And anyways, it's a very, very boring subject for me. But I wondered what your take on that was.
So again, whatever situation we're in, it's unique. Really the demand of this is that we explore the particular situation that we are, and we explore it in the ways that make sense to us, and we explore to see what the possibility is. But again, there's no guarantee of any particular outcome. So we explore it in whatever way makes sense to us. You know, maybe we have the feeling that one particular approach to this seems to be appropriate, or maybe we simply want to look around at all the various approaches to insomnia and the possible ways of removing insomnia. Whatever way seems appropriate is fine, but then within that exploration, life is going to show us what's possible and what isn't possible. So I can't sit here and say that if you do this and this and this, you're going to have this particular outcome. I can only say that, you know, life presents us with this situation where it's possible to explore whatever situation we seem to be in, and we get to discover what's possible, to apparently discover what's possible, and to discover what isn't possible.
I guess I'm puzzled because I sort of feel that the body should know best. So the body should allow, you know, if you meditate, which I've done all my life, you know, things should just naturally heal themselves, and the body should know best. And yet that doesn't seem to happen. So my approach over the last sort of 10, 15 years has been, oh well, forget it, you know, just go with it, I can't.
Right.
But that hasn't helped either, but I just kind of gone with it.
Right.
So I'm always left with this sense of, you know, why? It seems so pointless to wait to not sleep and feel rubbish a lot of the time.
Right, and this is, you see, again, within our storylines, we make this assumption. So we all come out of the womb, and there's nothing wrong with existence. All of the expressions of existence are fine because we haven't started identifying certain portions of it and saying that it's wrong or it shouldn't be happening this way. So from this non-dual perspective, it's like the basic happening of existence is perfectly fine in all of its expressions. And when we apparently come out of the womb, we don't have any sense that any of it is wrong. But in a few apparent years, we'll be starting to say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, it shouldn't be this way. So again, like yesterday I was mentioning that there hasn't been any time in history when humankind hasn't been killing itself in some way. And yet, within the apparent spiritual groups, there are many spiritual groups that say it's not man's true nature to be aggressive, that our true nature is to be loving, but there's never been any time in existence when that's been demonstrated. So somehow we get into our storyline enough that we begin to criticize the expression of existence, saying that it's wrong, that it shouldn't be this way. But the fact of the matter is that if you have a garden and you see, you know, you've planted a certain number of plants, some of the plants grow up in a certain way and other plants grow up in another way. And then we say, well, this one didn't quite grow properly, but actually it did grow properly. It grew in exactly the way that the universe expressed it. So in this case of insomnia, like ultimately it may be the case that you may have to explore resting in different ways, so that it's possible to get deep rest even when you're awake. So it may be not so much that insomnia disappears, but that you learn to rest even if you are awake, that you learn to rest in a very deep way. Again, you see, this is what's very odd about this non-dual sensibility or non-dual perspective, is that it's being presented and everybody's hoping that it's going to give a certain outcome, a certain positive outcome, but it's not. It's actually not offering anybody anything in particular. All it's offering is the whether or not you want to acknowledge that all of this is the dance of something that can't be explained. It can't offer you a particular outcome from that, from seeing that. Yes?
You were talking about representing itself. If you take sports, when we are young, we see a ping pong or something, and we start playing. So we learn it. It's not. I don't know.
Well, like some people have an interest in that, and some people don't have an interest in that, and you don't get to create whether or not you have an interest.
The interest is it comes naturally.
That's right. It arises in that way.
Learning.
The learning then plays out. Like you have. So let's say. Okay. So let's say I say to you, it would be really good if you all learned to play the piano. And so now, right off, some of you might have that interest. Some of you might believe me, thinking that you should play the piano because you think I'm somebody special and telling you to play the piano. So right off, there are certain people who are going to have that interest, and there are other people who are not going to have that interest. Now, if you have that interest, and you're pushed to play the piano, so you start learning the piano to whatever ability you have. But I would suggest that you not expect that you're going to play like Mozart, because everybody's going to play to a different apparent level of ability. So, you know, somebody will be learning to play and they have a natural talent for it. They have a real feel for the music. So even if they're not trained in any kind of big way, They just have a feel for music, and even if they're not technically correct in a lot of what they do, it sounds wonderful. It's got a real spirit to it. And then you've got somebody else who's technically very perfect, but they somehow don't have that spirit. They just don't have the feel for it. And then you have somebody else who has both the technique, the ability for the technique, plus they have that spirit. And nobody gets to decide any of that. You don't get to decide whether or not you initially have the interest in playing the piano, and you don't get to decide what abilities you have for playing the piano. It all just plays out as a movement of existence.
But take swimming, for example. When we were little kids, we were sucked into the sea.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sort of presenting itself, or is it just too powerful that you...
Well, you don't have to ask me about specific things, because from a non-dual perspective, everything just presents itself. There's no objection to it. Everything simply presents itself spontaneously, automatically, whatever word you like. I like the word automatic. Most people don't like the word automatic. They feel that it's somewhat unfeeling or cold or whatever. I love the word automatic. If you want spontaneous or organic, that's great. Whatever you relate to is fine. It's very important because, no, that's a very important point, because you know, we go to one particular teacher and it's being expressed a certain way, and we already have a sense of what words we like, what words we don't like. That's in us. So, you know, even the fact that we go to teachers and we go to one teacher and we listen to what they have to say, and we think afterwards, wow, that teacher's really wise, like what they have to say is really worth listening to. Then we go to another teacher and we listen to them, and after that ends, we think, that's not really a very good teacher at all. Like, they don't really get it at all. Like, how do you know? Like, how do you know one person is a good teacher and another person is a bad teacher? How do you know?
Well, I'm not getting anything out of that, and it bores me to death.
That's right. And the reason that you're not getting anything out of it is you already have a sense of existence in you, and the teacher that makes all the sense to you is just telling you what you're already feeling. And the one that's telling you something that you're not already feeling, you don't like. So the whole time you're just following your own sensibility, because that's all you can do. That's all any of us can do. So basically, a non-dual presenter is simply supporting the non-dual sensibility that you already have. Like, you have that natural sense of existence. I come along and I present something in the way that makes most sense to me. I can only present it in the way that I present it, because I don't get to decide how to present it. It just presents the way it presents. And if you relate to this non-dual sensibility, and the way I say it specifically speaks to your innate sense of existence, then you think it's a great teaching. So, but the fact of the matter is, you're the one who's deciding whether this is the right expression of existence. You're the one who's really saying, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, because you wouldn't be relating to it at all if it wasn't already your sensibility. So all the way along, it's just your sensibility unfolding in whatever way it's unfolding. The teachers have nothing to do with it. You can't make yourself a teacher. You need an audience to have to be a teacher, and it's the audience that decides whether you actually have anything worthwhile saying. It's like, so it's all about you. It's not about me. It's all about you. But again, if we examine this, what's happening is life is presenting us a certain way, and we're simply. It's almost as though we have to come to appreciate the expression that we are. And so certain people present this perspective, and it makes us feel, okay, I'm not totally crazy. This does make sense somehow. But it's really just offering a support to a sensibility that's already existing within you. And that just keeps unfolding in whatever way it unfolds. And again, as I was explaining yesterday, it unfolds in each of us in a unique way. So I have a friend back in Winnipeg. She's a professor at a university. So she teaches in the nursing faculty. And she loves thought. She totally loves thought. She lives for it. She loves systems. She loves analysis. She loves all of that. But she knows it's totally a game. Now, before this non-dual perspective arose, she didn't think it was a game. She thought those thoughts were absolute reality. The definition of existence was absolute reality, and it was driving her crazy. You know, all these contradictions. She could never quite nail life down in any complete way. It was always lacking something, it seemed, because thought is just an ever-shifting event. Whatever you're thinking in this moment, you could be considering something totally opposite next week. And who knows how it's actually going to play out. So, you know, when she thought that those definitions of life were the absolute reality, it was always presenting great difficulty, because what seemed to be clear one day wasn't clear another day. What seemed to make sense one day, there was a totally contradictory sense of existence the next day. Even if you think of life in one particular set of terms, they only make sense in relation to the totally opposite set of terms. So not only, like, when you see life in a particular way, you're also seeing it in the opposite way at the same time, and you can't get rid of that opposing view. So it's just endlessly conflicted, this focus on thought. And, you know, she really related to what I was presenting, and when she realized once and for all that the storyline wasn't an absolute truth, then she could play with thought all she wanted, and it wasn't a big problem. And the fact that she loved thought wasn't a big problem. At first there was some difficulty in acknowledging that to love thought wouldn't be a problem, but over time it just became obvious that she loved thought. It doesn't matter how much she sees that it's not the truth, she loves thought. And then somebody else doesn't even like thought. You know, they want to be out running down the street, they want to be doing physical labor because they love the physical expression of life. They love the vibration of their body. And like when I was 18, like, I would go hitchhiking across Canada. I would sleep in the rain on park benches. I would sleep in jail cells. I could sleep pretty much anywhere, actually. But I loved, it was like a dance. I loved being hungry. I would go 4.5 days without food. I loved being hungry. I loved the cold. I loved the exertion of it. I loved the challenge of it. Like, you show up in some really rough part of some city. You don't know this city at all, and you're trying to figure out, where can I sleep and not get beaten up? Like, I just loved the adventure of it. Because I was so much involved with my thought, it was that kind of situation that really brought me out of my thought, and I could feel the real adventure of life. I tried this a few years ago. I had the old feeling like I saw a picture of a certain piece of land on Cape Breton Island, and I thought, I just want to go there. I want to see the Cabot Trail, which is this really rugged area, and I thought, yeah, I'm not going to take a tent. I'm not going to take any food. I'll hardly take any money. I just want to get to that piece of land and sleep one night next to the ocean, because I just wanted that old feeling of, you know, just life being this whole thing that could just destroy you at any moment. So I get out there, and the week I was out there, they had more rain than they ever had in their entire history in that week. So I couldn't trek out onto the Cabot Trail and get to this piece of land. So I ended up being stuck in this one small village, and I don't know why it never struck me, but they had more black flies than any other place I'd ever been in my life, and I was eaten alive. Like, I was sleeping on a pier one night, and these things just wouldn't leave me alone. I was getting these big welts all over my arms and my neck and my face, and I was trying to find some place to find shelter. Anyway, to make a long story short, I realized at the end of that week that I really didn't have to do that anymore. Like, the time was over. It was great. You know, that was the appropriate thing to be doing at a certain time. It was no longer appropriate.
So would the thought then come, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have done that? Or
No.
No.
No, the thing was, like, this is the way life unfolded. You know, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I learned that it wasn't a good idea. So
it's not a mistake.
Not a mistake. No mistakes. It just is what it is. Like, going there was the only thing that made sense to me. At the end of the week, the only thing that made sense to me was, I don't have to do this again. So life is always presenting us in this moving, shifting, dancing way.
No, I was just going to say, and that's the story that you attach to all the words and the sounds that you put on that.
Right.
For us, and obviously translating that story of what occurred, the event, is necessary for you to actually tell us that. But if you take all those words, it just was what...
It just was what happened.
And there's no way, and what you just said doesn't it isn't what occurred.
No.
It's just this,
It's just a story, and in fact, here we are, we're sitting here, I'm apparently giving you a story, but that's not what's happening here. And you're apparently understanding the story, but that's not what's happening here, because we've all been taught to say that this event, you know, what seems to be presenting here is Darryl telling a story. You know, a person telling a story, and we've all been taught to say that whatever this is in hearing the story is somebody hearing the story and understanding the story, but that's not what's happening. What's happening here is a totally unexplainable event, but it's all happening anyway. You came here, these apparent words are coming out, it seems to make sense, the whole thing will break up at a certain point. We can't sit here forever, life won't let us sit here forever. We will move out, we will go in our individual directions, we will be compelled to engage with whatever needs we have, interests we have, urges we have, concerns we have. We will engage with life with the only abilities that we are. It's not even that we have needs, interests, concerns, urges, abilities, and lack of abilities. We're a particular assembly of needs, interests, concerns, urges, abilities, and lack of abilities. And there's no saying what it is. So legitimately, like I will say outright, often, I have no idea what's happening here now. Yes, I have all the storylines that you apparently have, but I don't even know what the storyline is. It's just coming and going. These, whatever this is just happening the way it happens. It can't happen any other way. So that's the...
We're playing two games at the same time, in a sense, because there's the acknowledgement that I don't know what this is.
Right.
But there's also, I know Darryl here doing my columnist seminar, or, you know, you've got the story as well as not knowing anything.
That's right. And all of that is embraced in the simple acknowledgement that it's a totally unexplainable happening, just happening the way it happens. So there's nothing incorrect in having a storyline. There's, you know, even if you acknowledge that the storyline can't be true, the storyline still presents itself because none of it is our doing. And so the non-dual perspective is the acknowledgement that bigger still is that all of it is totally unexplainable and it's just happening the way it's happening.
That's not what's happening here. What's happening here is that it's all explainable, probably.
Right, and that's fine.
It was like, because I'm sucked into the content.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm extremely stupid, you know?
No, no. You see, this is the thing, that this is saying every expression is legitimate. And that's why I say having a non-dual sensibility, having my particular sensibility, isn't what this is about. It's about acknowledging a larger event which is presenting itself, and everyone is the legitimate expression of this. So it's not that you end up having my specific sense of existence. A non-dual sensibility, or the agreement of a non-dual sensibility, is just a very loose, general agreement. A bunch of people have the feeling that life is a totally mysterious happening, just happening on its own, and that they don't somehow exist as anything separate from the happening. Now that's all that can be agreed on. Everything else is going to be different. And if we sit around and we talk about each of us having a specific sense of non-duality, we're going to find out that each and every one of us has a slightly different sense of non-duality. It's just a very loose general agreement, a very loose general interest. Everything else has to be different. In fact, even the loose agreement, if we examine it closely enough, each one of us has to have a different sense of it. But we have enough of a common agreement that we can talk about a non-dual sensibility. Now, it's ultimately saying that each and every one of us has to be a unique expression, because, again, in our day-to-day life, if, you know, everywhere we go in our life, we hear phrases like, nature is healthiest in diversity. What does that mean? Each and every apparent form in existence is different. We talk about evolution. People have this weird notion that evolution is somehow some progressive movement to a better state. That's not what evolution is. Evolution is talking about endless change. So evolution points out that nature is always producing different products, different apparent forms. They're absolutely unique. And in any given apparent period of time, certain products seem to thrive and the rest of them die. So, but again, the emphasis is on this endless production of different expressions. So even though we're talking about life being endlessly without form, like ultimately without form, we all agree that day to day, there is always the appearance of form. So if we're going to have that appearance of form, one of the acknowledgments of this non-dual sensibility is we have to acknowledge that each and every form is unique. So we can't find any two snowflakes that are identical. We can't find any two leaves on any trees that are identical. We can't find any two human beings with the same heart rate, the same breath rate, the same skin composition. In fact, each and every human being is unique. But for some reason, we think if we have a non-dual sensibility, we're all going to end up with the same result and be the same kind of person. And usually, you're thinking that you're going to be the kind of person that's presenting. Like, there are certain presenters that are very appealing in their presentation. They seem to be the kind of personality that you can really admire. And most of the people sitting there listening to the presentation are thinking, if I just had this understanding, I would be just like this person. I would be just as laid back, I'd have the same sense of humor, I'd be free, I'd be able to strip my clothes off in front of everybody and everything would be fine. But that's not what this is offering. This is offering you the chance to be the wild, exotic expression that you are, because the world's already had a Buddha. It can't produce another Buddha. It's got to produce each and every one of you. Like, each and every one of you are a unique expression. So, you know, the range of expression is infinite. Now, I just want to finish this one. Like, the range of expression is infinite, and it's only a general patterning that can be identified as people that are interested in a non-dual sensibility. And it's just one of the general expressions of existence. It's not the one and only legitimate expression of existence. It's just one of the mysterious expressions of existence.
I've spent a lot of time in big groups doing transformational work, trying to dismantle who the character was, how it started, how it was formed. And the idea was always that you get to a point where you'll have a blank slate and you can completely change and rewrite your life. And over the past few years, obviously, there's been a frustration about some of the storylines and patterns re-emerging still there. But what you're saying is, well, we don't choose that, and it's just our expression, our uniqueness. And yesterday we'd had a conversation about an event that had been a moment of separation, and where I began trying to control life very strictly, make sure nobody's abandoned, make sure I'm not abandoned. And then Brett had said to me something, he'd asked me to help organise a party, and I said, well, why? He just said, well, you'd be very good at rounding people up. And then I was at home on the balcony having a cigarette, and I thought, what does this one want? And it was like, oh, I just want to get everyone in the fold. And I thought, I'm just a sheepdog. You know, I'm just living life as a sheepdog. And like a sheepdog, you know, you're anxious and you're looking for acknowledgement, and that's just what's going on here.
That's right.
Yeah, I'm just a sheepdog.
Right.
Not the Buddha.
Right. And it's wonderful. I mean, we need sheepdogs in order to organize society. Like that's the thing. Like, each of us has an innate talent that life has already given, and we're busy.
I didn't choose to be a sheepdog.
Exactly. You know what it's like? There's one person that I know of that was seeking this awakening and had been through all of these different traditions, and he eventually heard about some master in the Himalayas, and he went off to find his master. And so he gets to this master, and the master raises cattle in order to live. So he says, I want you to go watch my cattle every day. And the master isn't giving him any kind of spiritual practice. And this guy, so for a month, you know, he goes off to the pasture with the cattle, and he's sitting there, and, you know, it's getting really boring, and he's thinking, like, what's the deal? Like, this guy's supposed to be this big, impressive teacher, and but he's not giving me any spiritual practices. So, and he's starting to get really upset that he's not getting any spiritual practices. So he's lost in thought one day, and then he snaps out of the thought, and it's around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the cattle have already started gathering together and moving back to the barn on their own. And in that moment, he realized, oh my God, it's all just the expression of nature. Like everything is being expressed by nature. The cattle know how to move. I know how to move. Like I know how to be what I am. The cattle know how to be what they are. All of it is the magical dance of nature, the universe. From this non-dual perspective, we're like basically it's pointing out that most of the things we're wanting life to give us, it can't give us those things. And so when we're focused on that, getting those things and always being frustrated and being worried about the fact that we're not getting them and wondering if there's something wrong with us in the fact that we're not getting them, we just ignore all of these incredibly beautiful things that are being expressed in life. And then added to that is that the fact that it's not promising that every moment is going to be wonderful, but what happens when all the terrible things present themselves, perhaps we can begin to acknowledge that that's also the legitimate expression of existence, and that we will have to endure those in whatever way makes sense to us to endure those. So it's just this ongoing dance all the time. Moments of great joy, moments of great sorrow, moments of great clarity, moments of great confusion, and all of it from this non-dual perspective is simply acknowledged as something that can't be understood in any way whatsoever. But in that, there's this aspect that each and every one of us is legitimate. We cannot go in the wrong direction. It's totally impossible to go in the wrong direction, because in any moment you can only be the expression of existence that you are. Or if you want to stay in the stories, in any moment you can only follow what makes sense to you in that moment. And the sensibility, the perspective that you have in that moment is an expression of existence. You didn't create that particular perspective. You didn't create that particular sense of existence. So you cannot go in the wrong direction. Nobody has ever gone in the wrong direction. And then added to that, if you're interested, you may want to acknowledge that if you actually make no effort, it's going to present itself on its own. And so that there can be this sense of incredible rest. And if effort, like if there's an urge to move in a certain direction and a certain kind of effort seems to be required, if the urge plays out, then the effort will arise on its own. You don't have to decide ahead of time that you're going to have that effort. You know, the urge, you know, life presents you with certain needs, certain interests, certain concerns, certain urges, and whatever needs, interests, concerns, and urges are the strongest, they will provoke what seems to be our efforts in a certain direction, and it will play out according to our abilities and our inabilities.
I just wondered, that underlines the fact that there's no mistake, which I get. But what about the flip side of that? If something being meant, the opposite of it being a mistake is that it's meant to be, presumably, or so is everything meant?
Is everything meant? No, from my sense, I mean, somebody may say it that way. That would be one way of saying it, but I don't relate to that word at all. And everything just is what it is. Like, I really relate to, it just is what it is. And, you know, ultimately, I don't even know what isness is. Because, you know, if we examine it, we say there's just what is. Well, what is seems to be forms ever moving on to something else, and nothing ever actually comes to be. Like, people say it's just being, but what is it that's being? Because nothing in particular seems to be. Like, it always seems to be shifting to something else. And so, you know, there are all kinds of ways you can relate to this. And so, you know, whatever words seem appropriate, like once you acknowledge that this event is just presenting itself, that we're not causing it, that we don't influence it in any way, then you will have a specific way of relating to that in a particular moment, or expressing that in a particular moment. And there'll be certain words that seem very meaningful in attempting to express that, and other words won't be meaningful at all. You know, that's why, like, you know, again, each of us is unique, and so in all of the various expressions of this, the expressions are unique. The personalities expressing it are unique, and it's odd that most people that seem to be listening to the expression are hoping that we're all going to be one particular kind of person, or that there is a particular ideal for human beings, and if we just understand life correctly, if we have this enlightenment or this awakening, we're all, you know, those of us who have this awakening will be this ideal human being. But that's not what it's offering. It never has offered that. You know, like in Buddhism, like the Buddha, when he got all these students coming to him and ordaining as monks and nuns, he would say, you know, some of you are personalities that like to live in the city, so go live in the city. And some of you are personalities that like to live in the country, so go live in the country. And some of you are personalities that like concentration practices and spiritual practices, so go do that. And others of you just really like the general teaching, so go hang out with other people who like that and just get interested in the general teaching. Be what you are. So, I don't know if I mentioned this.
Sri Ramana Maharshi said the same.
Right, exactly. Exactly, be what you are. People would come and say, well, what am I supposed to do? Just be what you are. Like they're giving you the bottom line in that. Or UG Krishnamurti saying, bugger off, like go home and live your lives. Like I can't help you. I can't help you, and if I can't help you, nobody can help you. So just go home and live your life. And he's pointing, like he's giving you the bottom line. He's actually being very kind in that. He's just cutting right to the chase. Like you have to be whatever expression you are. And it doesn't matter what he says. You know, you will have to be the expression you are. If you relate to him, that's your expression. If you don't relate to him, that's your expression. All of it is fine. Anyway, where was I?
Can I ask, can I continue about the compulsion?
Right.
It seems to be there's 2 points, but 2 different compulsions. Compulsions from life and our compulsion, which comes from thought. Is that reasonable or not?
The movement of thought is the compulsive expression of existence. Everything is the compulsive movement of existence. So everything is moving and shifting like the flowing of a stream, or the reforming of a cloud, the constant movement of a cloud, the constant shifting of the seasons. It's all simply the expression, a compulsive expression. Maybe the compelled expression is better, the compelled expression of existence itself. And there's no way of saying exactly what it is, but it's this compelled expression. So again, even if you decided to sit here for the rest of your life, it isn't going to happen, because you will be compelled to leave the room. You will be compelled to go to the toilet. You will be compelled to go get something to eat at a certain time. You will be compelled to move just because it's uncomfortable. There's always this urge to stop the movement, control the movement, make the movement go in a certain direction, and it's always simply just expressing itself in whatever way it does. And there's no way to stop it. We don't create it. We have this impression that somehow we're directing it, but we're not, because even the urge to direct it isn't our doing. It's simply expressing itself. And so it may be that you relate to this compelled aspect of existence. Like not everybody relates to that. Like in my own particular situation, in certain moments it just feels like there is only a push. That I don't have any particular interest in defining it or identifying it. I don't have any particular interest in focusing on any particular form. It just feels like there's this push in the moment. Like there's this, the Dylan Thomas poem, The Force That Through the Green Fuse Drives, is really appropriate for that, expressing this particular feeling, because he's describing this inexorable force that's causing a little plant to force its way up through a concrete sidewalk. It's like, that's the movement of life. That's how every thought arises in you. That's how every mood arises in you. It's this compelled movement of existence. That's how the body is continuously changing, apparently aging. That's how it is that, there's a compulsion within this apparent form that we call human beings to reproduce. It's a compulsive drive. The whole thing is this compelled expression. So again, within the storylines and with the notion of somebody being in charge, we end up having these stories about how, well, you know, I'm directing this from my wisdom, and it's just flat out not true.
Yeah, I just had a question. I mean, I kind of posed it to you a little bit yesterday. I'm someone who's naturally drawn to thought. That sort of tends to be what I do. And you know, Descartes was somebody who was looking at his own experience and was thinking, you know, what can I not doubt? And what he came to was that, you know, this is happening now.
Right.
But then he thought to himself, well, that could be a dream. You know, or the modern day idea is that that could be, you know, the matrix or a simulation ultimately.
Right.
And what Descartes came to was that no, it can't be a dream because God exists and he would never deceive me. So that was his sort of get-out clause. But sometimes when I get sucked into thought, and sometimes in moments when my mind-body is a little bit more panicky than usual,
Right.
I sometimes go into that and think, oh God, yeah, what if that is the case? Or how do I know this is real? Or how do I know there are actually people?
Right.
And I wondered if you had anything to say about that.
From this non-dual perspective, it eventually becomes a consideration of how reliable thought actually is in explaining anything. And so, you know, for most of us, we have this urge to understand existence in a certain way, thinking that if we just understand it in a certain way, we're going to feel somehow that life will be okay, or that we'll feel good even when things are difficult, if we could just understand the universe for what it actually is. But actually, when we examine the world of thought, we just find endless contradiction. And within this non-dual consideration, it becomes a consideration of the fact that life can't possibly be a tool for describing existence. So it's really looking at the limitation of thought and the unreliability of thought. And the mere fact that, you know, to enter the world of thought and to have this endless debate about it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that, or it, you know, it might not be this and it might not be that, and what is it? What is it? I mean, from this non-dual perspective, it's just looking at the fact that the world of thought leads to this exact situation where it's totally non-definitive, ultimately. Like, you're always left questioning, you're always left wondering, you're always left with these opposing views and opposing possibilities. And so then this non-dual sensibility comes along, and it just starts to look at the very basic aspects of the process of thought, and it says, well, you know, look what's happening here. Like, we're putting a label on first of all, we're trying to understand life in terms of form, and yet at the same time, we're running around saying life doesn't have any particular form because everything is changing. So, you know, there's a major contradiction that somehow our deepest sense of existence is that life doesn't have a particular form, and yet we want to understand it, so we go to thought, but thought is working totally with form. So there's a major contradiction there. If our fundamental sense of existence is that it has no form, and then we're trying to understand it through the terms of form, it doesn't make any sense. And then added to that is the fact that these labels, again, if you were in an English-speaking country, you get a certain set of labels. If you're in a French country, you get another set of labels. And if you're in Russia, you get a different set of labels. The labels can be anything at all. So, you know, let's talk, you know, instead of talking about bodies and consciousness and awareness, let's talk about Blix and flute and wassail. Let's just agree we can use the words Blix and flute and wassail. So we can sit around all afternoon and talk about bodies and consciousness and awareness, and that seems like we really know something. But if we sit around all afternoon focusing on sounds like Blix and flute and wassail, it doesn't feel like we're understanding anything. But that situation of bodies and consciousness and awareness, it's exactly the same situation as Blix and flute and wassail. They're just sounds pointing to forms that don't actually exist. And it doesn't matter how many sounds get attached to forms that don't actually exist, None of that process explains what's going on here, because we all have the feeling that life doesn't have any particular form. We all have the essential feeling that everything is changing. So this whole effort to understand existence in any way whatsoever is just absolutely frustrating, because we don't have a tool for understanding existence. Yes?
I mean, I feel like you've already answered this, so apologies for sort of stimulating the same thing, but it just keeps me thinking about willpower, when I've decided to do things or not to do things, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't, and then, you know, just sort of give up this whole effort of, you know, trying to do more sport or, you know, less whatever.
Yeah, the thing is that the willpower, like the urge to do something that's arising in you, is simply arising on its own. So we all have urges to do certain things in our life. Like some people have an urge to have a family, or some others have an urge to focus on career. For most of us, it's a mixture of many different things. Some of us have this urge to go on this, what seems to be an endless search through life. But what this is acknowledging is that that basic urge was never our doing. And so everything that unfolds from that urge is not our doing. Because our only possible way of really playing out with that urge is the playing out of the whatever abilities we have. And we don't even create our own abilities. So it's just becoming more comfortable realizing that, like sometimes we all have the feeling that, or in general, many people have the feeling that they're kind of holding themselves together at the point they're at, that they've worked really hard to get to the understanding that they have. They've worked really hard to hold their particular sense of existence together, and so they've got their clenched teeth and their tight neck and their knotted stomach, and they're wanting to hold it all together, and this is just saying, you haven't been doing any of it, so let's just relax, and you'll find out that it doesn't fall apart. Existence keeps expressing you with the basic sensibility you have. It's presenting interests, it's presenting loves, and your whole process will play out in whatever way it plays out. And the great thing is, it's presenting you with loves, things you enjoy. It's presenting you with whatever abilities it's presenting, and it'll all unfold in the way it unfolds. And you don't have to sit there tightly holding yourself together or thinking you need to go to another seminar to maintain it. And if you want to test this, if you want to test it, then you can explore it. So again, it's always just for your consideration. This is never saying that you have to have this perspective. It's saying this is one possible perspective on existence. If you relate to it, it's great. If not, that's great. All the other expressions of existence are just as legitimate, and there are people out there, this may be hard to believe, there are people out there who aren't interested in non-duality. And they are happy. They have lives that they enjoy. And that's great. It's just not what I get. The Buddha at one time said, there's only one difference between my enlightened disciples and the average person on the street. And this is the one difference. The average person on the street suffers the pain of life twice. They suffer the pain of life, and then they go around saying, why me, poor me, only me, it shouldn't be me, I shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be this way. And he said, my awakened disciples suffer the pain of life once. So life is painful. And it's even in, we have the feeling that if I investigate life, if I investigate the way my mind works, if I really see that big event, I'm never going to behave in any kind of uncool fashion. I'm going to just be totally cool and totally clear all the time, and unfortunately that's just not the way it's going to be. So, originally I didn't call what I was talking about non-duality. Like I had some friends in Winnipeg, and I said, there's something really weird happening with me. Like I can't find any expression, I can't find any example of me actually directing my life. Like can you come up with one? Can you find one? And in our consideration of this, we couldn't find any actual example of it, of us directing our lives. And I was saying, well, like all my life, all of us, we know that everything is changing. It's just one moving, shifting, dancing event. So, you know, anyway, it ends up sounding like a non-dual expression. So, you know, originally I'm not saying it's non-duality, and I write these books for the people that sort of come to the sessions that I was offering in Winnipeg, and then they go out into the world, and then all of a sudden I'm a non-dual presenter. And not only that, I'm a radical non-dual presenter. Wow, I'm a radical non-dual presenter. And then I hear all the opinions about radical non-dual presenters, and I'm thinking, oh God, what a headache. Like, you know, the assumption is I'm wanting to sweep aside our daily activities, I'm wanting to sweep aside our emotions, and I'm wanting to sweep aside thought, and I'm just asking everybody to jump into some endless, I don't know what I'm supposed to be asking people to jump into, but I'm not doing that. Like, it's not non-duality. It's just a simple consideration of our life, and it's a simple acknowledgement that most of us in our life, we end up hurting to some degree. And for each of us, it's different. Like, for some of us, we seem to get a lot more hurt than others, but each of us end up hurting, and it doesn't matter who you are, there will be a time that you end up wondering whether you're going to survive the next few days. It's like, even if it doesn't hit you until almost your deathbed, maybe everything's just gone along very nicely through most of your life. And I mean, some of us seem to lead very blessed lives, but at some point, you know, some of that blessedness is going to fade away, and it's going to hurt. We're going to be confused. We're going to want to escape that hurt, and this non-dual expression is saying, you don't know if you're going to escape that hurt. And actually, in my experience, it's unlikely that you're going to escape that hurt. So one of the freedoms is the acknowledgement that life hurts. If you always think you have an option, ultimately, if you think there's something out there, some golden moment of understanding, or some, you know, esoteric meditation practice that's somehow going to convert every moment of pain into a golden glowing moment, it's not true. It's just not true. So it seems the case that with those of us that are expressed with a non-dual sensibility, that we become more relaxed about a lot of aspects of life. You know, certain things that we might have found ourselves mentally and emotionally objecting to very quickly, you know, now it takes a little longer for it to happen, or maybe some of it seems to fall away totally. But it never actually, you know, and so it's kind of a, like it's like it's tempting us to, yeah, just start believing that you finally overcame all of the difficulty. Just start believing that it's not going to hurt ever again. And the moment you start believing that, it's just bang. Something happens that you just didn't anticipate, you weren't expecting, you weren't planning, and it just happens, and it hurts. And then there's no way of clearing the hurt away. The hurt has a lifespan of its own. It plays itself out in whatever way it plays itself out, and then it moves on to something else, and then it starts tempting us again. You know, it starts feeling good. We're pretty clear. It's starting to feel like, yeah, maybe I've finally gotten it together. And then, you know, ultimately, even if it does seem like you finally got it all together, what's going to happen in the end? Like, you fade away. Like, much ado about nothing. A tempest in a teacup. It's just, that's the way it is.
Do you have the sense of I living in you, or no I, or is there emptiness inside?
Emptiness, that's an interesting question. What do you, interesting word, like what do you mean by emptiness?
Like a lot of people, they talk about, well, that sense of I is not, it's an illusion, and the I comes and goes, there's nothing holding it, you know.
Right, so in my particular situation, I don't have the impression there's anything in here looking out. Like, in my apparent exploration of existence, it's become quite obvious that, you know, if I put my hands like this, I look out here, there's all this seeing. If I bring my attention back to my hands and I try to see what's behind the hands, to see if I actually have an experience of something seeing, I don't have that experience. It's the same with the hearing. I don't have an experience of something doing the hearing. There's just what we call hearing. So the Buddha said, basically he had the teaching that in the seeing there's just the seeing, in the hearing there's just the hearing, in the touching there's just the touching, in the tasting there's just the tasting, in the smelling there's just the smelling, and in the thinking there's just the thinking. Now, that's great, the Buddha gave that teaching, but it doesn't stop there for me, because for me it's not seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, and thinking. It's this. And seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, and thinking are just meaningless sounds that present themselves. So the whole thing is just an event that doesn't have any explanation, any ultimate explanation.
So if there's this experience and representation, why the emphasis about the heart?
Because no matter how much you acknowledge that this is a totally unexplainable event simply presenting itself, it always presents itself in apparent form, and one of the apparent forms is pain, upset, difficulty. Those are some of the apparent forms. You can't escape that. The whole thing is presenting itself in that way. It doesn't have a particular form. That's why one moment it feels happy and the next moment it feels sad. It doesn't have an actual form, like it has apparent form. So it doesn't have actual form, so that's why in the apparent form it seems like clarity and then it seems like confusion. It seems like joy, then it seems like sorrow. It seems like night, then it seems like day. Like, is existence dark? Or no, let's make it this question. Is existence light? Well, wait a while, it's going to be dark. Is it warm? Well, wait a while, it's going to be cold. Is it clear? Well, wait a while, it's going to seem confused. Is it joyous? Well, wait a while, it's going to seem sorrowful. It doesn't have a form. So it's very interesting because people come to these spiritual teachings and they hear about the formless, the formless. If I could just find the formless, everything would be better. And I'd really be able to find the formless if things just wouldn't stop, things wouldn't keep changing on me. Like, I'd be able to find the formless if I could just stop the fact that happiness moves to sadness. If I could find the formless, I would just be totally content, but things keep shifting around on me and it really aggravates me. And one moment I'm clear and then I'm unclear, but if I could find the formless, I would be happy. Well, what is this event that's moving and shifting and always changing beyond our control? We're chasing a specific form, we try to hang on to it, it melts away. With our hands on it, it just melts away. It changes, it moves on to something else. That's the formless. That's what the teaching is, that's what these teachings are trying to express. Acknowledge the formless, and then we don't go around hoping that it's going to be one thing in particular, that it's going to give one result in particular. We finally acknowledge that it's going to give whatever it gives, and it has no particular form. But for most of us, when we first hear that teaching about everything is changing, it's all the unformed, we have the hope that if we could just understand that deeply enough, it's not going to present itself as an unhappy situation. And so that's why you hear the presentation, and it's just declaring in a very simple way what your experience already is. I mean, we'll walk around saying, oh, my body isn't what it used to be, and my relationship isn't what it used to be, and the economy isn't what it used to be, and because it's all changing in a way that we don't want it to change, because it's formless. And then we hear about something called the formless, and we think it's something else. We think that it's out beyond all of this, and that if we could just connect with this invisible formlessness, that we're going to be happy all the time. Yes?
I can completely understand how grasping onto one ideal is to try and make yourself completely happy is obviously completely impractical. But obviously we wouldn't all be here unless we thought this wasn't going to make us more happy, in the sense that, is it not the sensibility of non-duality? From what I gather you're saying is that it's the freedom that's gained from accepting life and its ups and downs, in a way does make you happier for longer periods, or more chilled out, or kind of, there is that element, so that's moving in a happy direction, but it's not ever going to be happy forever. Am I got?
Right, and this is where the word happiness becomes difficult, because happiness is usually trying to describe, or usually pointing to, a moment of pleasure of some kind, and our response to that pleasure, like it feels pleasant. So we use this word happy. That's why in the spiritual traditions it gets a little more refined. Like they talk about joy, which isn't the arising of a specific moment of happiness that's going to stay. It's the acknowledgement of the richness of the full expression. So, sometimes in the acknowledgement, so in some apparent cases, there is this, well, let's make this very specific. Like in my own particular case, like sometimes life just has a certain ache, and sometimes that ache can be felt, as a physical expression within my chest area. But as I get older, when that ache comes, it's not quite as easy to define it as specifically an ache or a pain. It's got some warm, throbbing quality to it. It is on some level an ache, which is some kind of pain, but it's also got this rich and vital feeling to it. Now, that's just in my specific situation, but as you were pointing out, like, for those of us that are expressed with a non-dual sensibility, we come to acknowledge this full range of expression of life. And so, knowing that that's the natural expression of life, we become more relaxed about it. So then, in some of the ancient terminology, they would talk about bliss, that, there would be love, bliss, whatever, can't remember it now, but so anyway, this bliss is more a reference to this incredible state of rest, this feeling more at ease with all of what life is presenting. But often that ease is the eventual, like it seems to present itself with both the intellectual understanding that there is this up and down presentation to life, but it is also there a lot from the fact of really feeling the pain of life and experiencing a number of difficult times and finding that you can survive them. So it's then the actual experience of what we would call deep pain, when it comes and then it goes. When it leaves, it's like we realize, oh yeah, life can be extremely painful and I still survive. And so that experience, accompanied with the fact that if we consider the movement of life, that its movement is this, what we would call an up and down movement, that it's formless, it's always moving and shifting and dancing in the way it dances. It's the combination of those two things that actually seem to give rise to a more relaxed state. So like in the Taoist teachings, they would say, the sage simply awaits the decrees of heaven. Now, the decrees of heaven would be simply the automatic movement of this happening that we call this present happening, this moment. And it presents itself in whatever way it presents itself. So those are literally the decrees of heaven. And so the sage ends up simply waiting for the decrees of heaven. Or you have the Zen master Rinzai. The story is he would wake up in the morning and the other monks could hear him waking up, and they could hear him moving to the window and throwing open the shutters, and he would scream out the window, "What have you got for me today?" Because he had no idea what was coming. It could be wonderful, it could be terrible. If I ever thought that I had to be some idyllic notion of a human being, I'd spend my life in endless suffering. Because I'm not some idyllic notion of existence, some idyllic notion of a human being. I am the presentation that nature is presenting right here. People want, they hear about the Buddha, and, the thing about organized religion, there's a reasonably well-known joke. God and the devil are walking down a path, and up ahead on the path they see this sparkling little something, and God picks it up and looks at it, and the devil's really inquisitive. He's saying, "What's that?" And God says, "It's the truth." And the devil says, "Give it here and I'll organize it for you." Because the moment you get into an organization, whether it's stated outright or it's not stated outright, what exists is some subtle notion of what that spiritual teaching is going to produce. That it's going to produce some idealized standard of what a human being is. And just because most of the people in that group don't really connect with what would be the non-dual sensibilities of that spiritual teaching. So if you go to any organized religion, the vast majority of the people in that organized religion are focusing on the rules, they're focusing on the rituals, and a very small core element are focusing on this description of life as a totally unexplainable, formless dance, simply presenting itself, and that we are the expression of that. So, you know, the world of Christianity in general, you know, is not the focus on the non-dual sensibility. But if you read the Bible, you will find the heart of the teaching is a non-dual statement. So they're ultimately saying there is only the expression of God, and if they, you know, they have situations where apparently somebody is asking God what God is, and God says, I am the I am. I am simply the amness or isness of existence. So, and they state outright that all of it is God's doing. Everything is God's doing. They even say we live in God, that God is spirit, meaning God has no particular form. And all of us are living and breathing and acting in God. And all the way through the Bible, there's references to rivers and oceans and the flowing, and all of it being the expression of this larger unexplainable happening. And yet, you know, and ultimately it's saying that you can only be what God expresses. And yet, the basic sense of Christianity is that you're going to have to work really hard to somehow get into heaven, when it's actually saying you're God already. So, you know, Christ's big message was not that you really have to work hard to be something else. Christ was simply saying that you're already saved just by being the expression of God. And all you had to do was believe in what he was saying. And he said, if you believe in me, you will discover the river of life flowing in you. So, you know, if you sit down and you make no effort to do anything, what do you discover? The river of life flowing as you.